Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this instalment, Chris Pratt and Bryce Howard must race against the destruction of the dinosaurs in Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. Set 3 years after its predecessor, and the island of Isla Nublar and its dinosaur inhabitants are threatened by the imminent eruption of its once dormant volcano, with the world divided over whether to save the genetically created animals. Claire, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, is contacted by John Hammond's business partner Benjamin Lockwood, played by James Cromwell, and his right-hand man Eli Mills, played by Rafe Spall, to join a private mission to save 11 species. She'll also need to bring in former trainer Owen, played by Chris Pratt, to capture the Velociraptor Blue. But once they arrive, they soon discover that things are not what they seem. In 1983, Jurassic Park stomped onto our screens, boasting revolutionary special effects, and quickly became one of the most beloved and successful blockbusters of all time, being a near-perfect combination of fantasy, excitement, and horror that only Spielberg could deliver, and even he had trouble replicating its success. It was followed by 2 middling sequels that weren't terrible by any means, but definitely paled in comparison to the first film, and the series lay dormant up until 2015, when it was revived with Jurassic World, directed by Colin Trevorrow. I really wasn't a fan of Jurassic World because, on the one hand, it pandered to audiences' nostalgia by inundating them with references to the first film, but then it chastised them for appreciating them, telling this meta-narrative of audiences becoming increasingly jaded with big blockbuster spectacle, the kind that Jurassic Park itself helped introduce. And as a result, the film feels very cynical and mean-spirited, or at least it did to me once you scratch past that pseudo-Spielbergian veneer. But nevertheless, the film was enormously successful, so here we are with the sequel. Trevorrow does not direct this outing. He's moved those duties over to J.A. Bayona, who's best known for his work on The Orphanage and The Impossible, and I really like him as a director. Nevertheless, Trevorrow did co-write the script with his regular writing partner, and he's also an executive producer, so his influence can very much be felt here. But nevertheless, I thought that with Bayona directing, there would be an improvement on the last outing potentially. Unfortunately, there isn't. If you thought Jurassic World was bad, you haven't seen anything yet. Fallen Kingdom is arguably the worst movie to come out of this franchise to date. The film doesn't start off terrible. In fact, most of its best elements come relatively early on. The pre-title sequence in particular is fantastic. It really puts you on edge and unsettles you right from the moment the film begins, and there is this sense that this isn't going to be a Jurassic movie as we know it. There's going to be something darker and, more importantly, scarier. It seems that that's what Bayona's really trying to accomplish here. He's trying to give the series its bite back, and to that end he really showcases that in the film's opening, which is full of tension and suspense, but also has a bit of dark humour to it. In isolation, it's one of the best directed set pieces in the entire Jurassic franchise, and watching it I thought, I might actually enjoy this a lot more than its predecessor, that we're actually with a safe pair of hands here. Unfortunately, the problems with Fallen Kingdom really begin when the plot actually does, but generally speaking, the first act or so of the movie, it's better than what follows. There's a lot of problems, but generally speaking, when the film's in its more traditional Jurassic mode, when it's more in its comfort zone on Isla Nublar in the very earliest stage of the film, that does actually work, I think, for the most part, and the big volcano set piece is very well done, and I think that that is really where a lot of the money on this film has gone, for better or for worse. However, even in its earliest stages there are still substantial story problems. The premise in isolation of a secondary extinction event for the dinosaurs is not not without promise and does use some interesting ideas, but it also introduces massive continuity holes. The fact that John Hammond, who apparently spared no expense, built his theme park on a massive dormant volcano that, if it became active again, would wipe it out in mere moments. Or the fact that there is actually a second island of dinosaurs, is the Sauna from the Lost World and Jurassic Park 3, and that's still in continuity with the World films. I know this for certain because Lockwood wheels onto the scene quoting Hammond's lines from the end of the Lost World. And I went to this moment, wait, hang on, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because if Isla Nublar went up, it still wouldn't matter because you've still got that island of dinosaurs there on that research and testing site. And I know that in film backstory they've shipped a lot of the dinosaurs off that island, but even so, there was still a viable ecosystem last we knew of it. There's no reason why it couldn't still exist, other than the film wants you to try and not remember it, especially given that the mission that Claire is sent on is to take these 11 species and supposedly put them on a sanctuary island. And you go, well, you already have that. It's called Isla Sauna. Like, from the outset, the movie doesn't make any sense. This whole premise is invalidated. The script here is absolutely atrocious. If this is representative of the sort of quality that Trevorrow handed in for Star Wars, the gig that he lost, no wonder he got the boot from it. This is so bad that I cannot believe this was ever allowed to roll cameras in this state. This needed a major top-to-bottom rewrite. This movie has acres and acres of plot holes and utterly ridiculous things happening in it. And I don't just mean in a sort of wider sense, I mean in a moment-by-moment sense. There are a lot of things that happen in this movie that are completely and utterly preposterous and don't make any sense. And I know what some of you are thinking, like, okay, it's a movie about dinosaurs. You don't have to take it so seriously. Granted, I accept that, but I would also like to counter that basic suspension of disbelief should be something that I should at least accept from a blockbuster. You know, sort of common sense things like boats don't generally pull away with their doors wide open, not unless they were planning to sink. Or the fact that at one point Chris Pratt shows that he is apparently made of asbestos, because not only does he wriggle semi-paralysed within inches of lava enveloping around him, to the point where at one point he actually rolls his hand through the lava completely without any injury. He also gets caught up by the ash cloud while simultaneously running at about the same speed as the dinosaurs around him. And I don't think I'm asking for much. All I'm asking for is a movie that doesn't completely fall apart if you apply the smallest semblance of logic to what's happening on screen. Characters regularly do things that beg of belief and are totally nonsensical purely for the sake of forwarding the plot or to get themselves killed. And I know Jurassic World had a lot of that, but this is way worse. Even more than some of the other Jurassic movies. The characters in Fallen Kingdom are borderline Darwin Award candidate worthy. They're the kind of characters that go, oh, I've never seen this dinosaur before, I'll just walk into a cage with it. Which incidentally is protected by a simple bolt lock. That's the sort of writing that is plaguing this movie from start to finish. And speaking of characters, you might recall that the first Jurassic Park was full of very memorable ones and played by quite distinctive character actors. Everyone remembers the dialogue from even the smallest roles, from the likes of Samuel L. Jackson, Wayne Knight, Bob Peck, B.D. Wong, all the way up to the leads of Neil, Goldblum, Dern and Attenborough. You cared about those characters, and that was that film's real secret weapon. Sure, it brought us in with the special effects, but it told a really compelling, well-told story with characters that you genuinely wanted to survive. You know, generally, a stampede sequence is greatly improved if you actually care if is the characters are going to be stomped underfoot. The same cannot be said for the characters in Fallen Kingdom, which at best are purely mechanical and mercenary. They are but cogs in the machine. They are there to forward their function in the plot, literally in the case of Claire and Owen, as it turns out, and they discover, but you can see this in other ways as well, like the sidekick characters of veterinarian Tia and their hacker Franklin. He's arguably the most annoying character in the movie. I don't blame Justice Smith for his performance here, but in general, the writing of Franklin makes you really desperately see him want to die, because he spends the entire movie going, "Are we gonna die? Are we gonna die? Are we gonna die? Are we gonna die? Are we gonna die?" And that's not an exaggeration. That is literally how his performance is pitched. The whole way through the film, it is completely obnoxious. If he was an attempt at comic relief, he failed miserably. And while these characters do get slight amounts of, characterization, like obviously Franklin is the nervous one, and Tia is quite snarky, that's about as far as it goes, because really the only reason they're tagging along here is because they're needed at certain points in the plot for it to move forward. Like, we need a vet in the plot, so she's in it, and we need a hacker character at several points, and generally when the movie doesn't require them, they just drop out either into the background or just completely fall out of the movie for extended periods of time. To give a real example of just how much this movie really doesn't care about these characters and really just ascribes them their purpose, Franklin's last name is Webb. He's a hacker with the last name Webb. Because apparently Franklin Netscape would have been too obvious. And we haven't even got to characters that return from the previous movie. Claire, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, was very criticised by a lot of viewers of Jurassic World with a depiction of her being an ice queen. Her character has done a total 180 in this installment, which seems like a reaction to the criticisms that character got. And okay, I can get behind a character growing and changing between movies, but she's completely changed personality. She's now an activist, she's part of the dinosaur protection group, and she's trying to save the dinosaurs. She at one point actually makes a very long speech about, do you remember the first time you saw a dinosaur? And that rings completely hollow the second you remember that her character in the previous movie very infamously said, "Let's be honest, no one's impressed by a dinosaur anymore." Like, the characters from the two movies don't sync up whatsoever. As for Chris Pratt as Owen, he looks bored as hell here. He is very much sort of just there throughout the whole movie. Normally, Pratt can be trusted to add a little bit of charm and humour to the proceedings, but he is given nothing to do here, and it really shows. He is purely there to run around from dinosaurs, and otherwise has very little to offer to the movie. He looks very visibly disinterested, and so would I be if this was the material I was offered. Even the villains of the movie are woefully underdeveloped. Rafe Spall has a couple of scenes near the start where he acts like a human being, but as soon as his character starts to show his true colours, he suddenly turns into this cartoon character, but that has nothing on Toby Jones. Toby Jones just walks on screen and he's wearing this oversized pair of false teeth in his mouth for extra sliminess. And it seems like they're so big in his mouth that he barely seems able to speak past them. He is a total caricature. And in general, these villains and their motivations also make absolutely no sense whatsoever. They completely contradict themselves. Elsewhere, we have James Cromwell as Lockwood in a role that's very much peripheral and could have almost been entirely written out of the film. What's weird about this character in general is that it seems very much like they wrote that with the intention of having Richard Attenborough reprise his role as John Hammond, which is a bit of an odd thing to do because he died before the first Jurassic World film, and yet here we have this obvious this obvious parallel character, but they've changed it slightly so that he's Hammond's old business partner. But he's otherwise virtually identical, right down to the fact that he has a cane with amber on top of it. And Lockwood brings us to another major character in the form of Maisie, played by Isabella Sermon, his granddaughter, who spends large chunks of this movie wandering around this giant mansion, uncovering secrets and conspiracy. She's the third lead in this movie, essentially. She gets a whole subplot dedicated to her, and it completely kills the pace in this movie, stone dead, every time it cuts back to her, and it ruins any of the kind of suspense and mystery about what's going on, because it's very clearly laid out in these scenes. These would have been far more effective reveals if they naturally unfold later in the movie. As it stands, you're well ahead of everything that's going on, and it's really, really unnecessary. This character does not need to be here. She simply just adds more bloat onto the running time. It turns out that her character does have some significance that is very heavily foreshadowed, but it's the kind of revelation that makes you go, wait, what? Huh? What becomes clear is that this is a movie that favours dinosaurs over people, and as such completely chickens out of the ethical debate that it itself sets up. And so the movie very much tries to push the audience towards wanting the dinosaurs to survive. And so we get these very kind of loaded scenes where we see characters watching recordings of Owen training cute little baby Blue and making statements like, she's showing signs of empathy and intelligence. She's a killing machine! At one point, another character actually refers to Blue as the second smartest creature walking on the planet, which feels like an exaggeration. But generally speaking, the movie really wants you to sympathise with the dinosaurs and their plight. There are several scenes where we're watching dinosaurs suffocate to death. You'd have to have a hard heart not to be emotionally affected by those scenes, seeing an animal suffer. However, these animals probably should not exist. In fact, they only exist because of man's hubris. They are an example of us stepping way over the line, but the only character that expresses that opinion is Dr. Malcolm, very briefly reprised by Jeff Goldblum in a pair of bookending scenes that are no more than 2 minutes in screen time and look like he filmed them in an afternoon, and probably did, but he seems to be the only character in the movie with the slightest semblance of common sense, because, at least if all the dinosaurs die, we won't get any more sequels, so maybe this act of God should be allowed to happen and reset the natural order of things. But by far the worst thing about it is that it's unbelievably boring. Remember how I said that most of the film's budget seems to have been spent on the volcano set piece? That wasn't me exaggerating. The second and third acts of this movie are barren. They either take place on the cargo ship, or at least half the movie takes place in the giant Lockwood mansion. And I know what they're trying to do here. They were trying to be claustrophobic and try and have this kind of gothic haunted house atmosphere, but with dinosaurs, which in theory is promising. In execution, however, is absolutely tedious to watch on screen, because what ends up happening is that it just ends up being characters running down darkened corridors for ages. This movie seemed like it wouldn't end at points, quite frankly, and I came out of this movie thinking that it was the most expensive, cheapest looking film I'd ever seen. No exaggeration, this plays like a direct-to-video sequel. It genuinely does. The kind where they just barely broke even, so they're trying to conserve the budget, and they're trying to conceal the special effects by turning off the lights. That's what this movie is. The whole point of this series is spectacle. People don't go to Jurassic movies to see people running around darkened corridors for the best part of an hour. I haven't seen a movie with this much corridor action since Fantastic Four. And what makes this worse is that it's so dark. Not only is it a complete waste of time seeing this in its 3D presentation, and I'm so glad I didn't fork out the extra money for that, but It's so obscuring detail, you can barely make out the money shots, which is exactly the thing that you're here for in this movie. You don't really get a good look at a lot of the action a lot of the time. And that really just baffles me, and I think that a lot of people will be greatly underwhelmed by this film. Even fans of the series will be hard-pressed to defend Fallen Kingdom, which is to Jurassic Park what Alien Covenant is to Alien, in my opinion, in the way that it aggressively squanders audience goodwill. And I know this is meant to be a transitionatory sequel in this, meant to be pushing the franchise in a different direction for future installments, and they've obviously got plot threads left dangling for that very purpose. They bring back B.D. Wong's Doctor Wu purely for the purpose of teasing things in the future. But you know what? A film that keeps constantly teasing that, oh, in the next movie, then it's going to get really interesting, then it's going to get really exciting. You know, all the things that we could have done this time around without actually doing anything interesting in the present, that's a very bad film, because the best advertisement for a franchise, for sequels, is to make a good movie. After this film, no one's going to be excited for follow-ups because this is absolutely dull as dishwater. And quite frankly, to paraphrase Dr. Malcolm, these filmmakers were so obsessed with what they could do, they didn't think of what they should do. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is a gigantic disappointment that is arguably the worst film in the series. The film is at its best in its earliest stages, where director J. Bayona manages to stage some effective moments, but the film barely manages to interact with the moral question it sets up, trying to make the dinosaurs cuddly and sympathetic, and the film quickly shifts away from it. When it does, the film completely collapses. Although moving off the island offers potential new story possibilities, almost half the film becomes a seemingly endless and tiresome run around the darkened corridors of an enormous mansion. It ends up being the one thing a Jurassic movie should never be, and that's small, and Bayona can't do much with the dreadful script co-written by Trevorrow that regularly has absurd lapses in logic. This feels like a stopgap installment teasing yet more sequels to come, forgetting to be entertaining in its own right. All the wonder and fun has been stripped from this ramshackle roller coaster. If you like this review, then you can stomp over to my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.